my name is Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a video that I've been planning for a hot minute now. And a lot of you guys, well, one of them, my sweet little Andrie, had asked in my last writing advice video, which was my... What was my last writing advice video? So my last writing advice video was tips on starting draft 1. And so it's been a hot minute. I was wearing a sweater in that and I am now in a nice see-through blouse and a bralette, so you can tell that the seasons have definitely changed. It took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to format this video because, you know, it's difficult to really talk about how to start our first chapter because it's different for everyone. So I think I've come up with some tips and tricks, as well as going through and analyzing some chapters from books that I have not read, with the exception of one book. So let's get into it because I have a lot to talk about. So let's start off with my handy dandy bullet journal. We're almost done with her. Like, look at how much we have left. So I have a couple of pieces of advice before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of like reading a first chapter and like analyzing it. Typically, what I like to say this as like a disclaimer, it really depends on you as an author. I think how you want to start your books and like the genre that you're writing in really make an impact on how you're going to make the first chapter. How I do in most of my advice videos, this is just general advice from how I typically like to start my first chapters and how I have kind of dissected chapters that I have read, or how I, going into books, would read a book that I have not read before and dissect the first chapter and see what tips and tricks and like how this is formatted and how that is formatted and how I can take that into my own writing and make that into a stronger chapter. And disclaimer again, this is not for like your first draft. Like sometimes, yes, your first draft can start off with like a really strong line and sometimes those lines stay together. But I think what also makes a strong chapter is rewriting and knowing what works for your book and what doesn't. So like say you have a really strong line in your first chapter, or like a really good first chapter for draft 1, that can change dramatically. So I think taking these tips and like just learning what to look for in terms of what interests you as a reader versus how that can help you as a writer will really help in the like rewriting process and like future first chapters, if that makes any sense. There are a couple of ways to start a first chapter. One is in media res, which is personally my fave. What in media res is like in the middle of action, so like you start off like not necessarily like a big fight scene or like something, but in the middle of a scene. Say you start off with a piece of dialogue where the scene is continuing, can start like in the middle of, or maybe you do start from a fight scene, or you start off with like a panicked breath, or you know, that's what in media res is. The second way is to set the tone and the mood, which is pretty self-explanatory. That's you having a character walk through the woods or something and like talk about the woods and like set the tone and like imply the foreshadowing is going to be happening throughout the rest of the book. This one goes back to in media res, and that is dialogue. So like starting your book off with like a piece of dialogue that kind of like pulls the reader in but tells them basically 0 to nothing, but does the job of getting the reader in there. Introducing motivations, protagonists, and antagonists are other ways of doing this. There are some books that do this. I believe City of Ashes does this in the prologue, where we meet Valentine again, and it's his point of view. We also have introducing protagonists, which is the basic, like, you know, your Clary Frey going into the club with Simon. Motivations would be probably something along the lines of like Katniss Everdeen, or probably Feyre from A Court of Mist and Fury, where we see them doing something and like we find out the reasons for why they're doing this thing and why they're doing so and so and so. So the best piece of advice from personal experience that I can give you is that your first chapter, and this sounds really redundant because this is what everyone says, is meant to capture the audience. In terms of like writing an essay, this has to be your thesis statement. It has to be the thing that tells your reader that, hey, this is a good book. This is a good thing that I worked my blood, soul, and tears into. It's a good thing, and this is what's gonna grab you, and then the rest of my book are my supporting arguments as to why this is a great book and you should love it. It doesn't have to be action-packed. It can, like I said, it really just depends on who you are as a writer and whether or not it fits the tone of your book. If you feel like a nice traipse to the forest to explain kind of like the world around them, as the world is gonna be a big part of the book, then go for it. But if you feel like you need to start with like the character falling out of a tree and dying, or an action-packed line or some dialogue or something, then do so. But like I said, it doesn't have to be like action-packed. Don't think that because when people say it has to grab the reader, it has to be like bam, 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 bam. The first chapter has to grab the reader, but I think the importance of is how you kind of write the first line / the first page. Because as I go through these like examples, you'll see what I mean by what, like when I say it has to grab the reader by like the first line and then the first page. Because we all know what, like, we all know the horror stories of like querying agents or like editors, and like you give them the manuscript and they like read the first couple pages and they go pfft. So it's the same thing with a reader basically, except your book's already out there for the world, so you have to somehow get the reader's attention and not have them put your book down past the first chapter. So the first one I'm going to start off with is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This book has been on my radar, and let me tell you a little bit about it before I get into the actual analyzing of the first chapter. So for The Darker Shade of Magic, this is about Kel, who is a traveler, and what that means is that he can travel between different Londons. There is a red London, a grey London, a black London, and I think a white London, and he is one of the few people who can travel between these worlds. And that's all I need to tell you, because that sounds pretty interesting as it is. As you can tell from the first line already, we have Kel wore a peculiar coat, and then it kind of draws you in because it's a single line, and like the word peculiar itself is a pretty like attention grabbing word. We kind of want to know more about the coat, so as we keep reading down, we see that it had neither one side, and as we talk about this coat, we see a bit more about the introduction to the world, which is fantastical. There's magic in this world, and then as we see him continue on throughout this world and talk about it, we see kind of the setup for this world and like how the magic works, just a smidgen, as well as like potential issues that we might have between kingdoms, which could be a plot point, and then as well as his like how the magic works and how it functions, take away from the magic. And then by the time that the first chapter ends, we end with 2 paragraphs, well 3, the 3 paragraphs being the most like important part. It hummed with magic. As Tassen, he said, transfer. The patterned paper rippled and softened and gave way under his touch, and Kel stepped forward and through. Throughout this first chapter, we get a bit of a hint of like what this world is about. We see Kel's position in this world. He is a messenger, he's a traveler, but he does have a side. We meet the king. We also get hints at another character named Rai or Ri, and we see a bit more of like how this magic works and why he has to like dress in a certain way, and why this coat is so important to the overall like feeling of this novel. The next one is Middlegame by Shauna Maguire. I have no idea what this book is about. I know there are twins called Roger and Dodger. By the looks of the first chapter that I have read, there is a save the world aspect and like a sci-fi time travel aspect as well. In this first chapter, we see the beginning lines, which is like not even in the paragraph itself. It's more so, I'm trying to point to where it would be on the screen, but it's not working. And it says timeline, 5 minutes too late, 30 seconds from the end of the world. Already that's pretty interesting, because it's like, what do you mean timeline? Are we going to be doing some jumping here? What's going on? And then the next line after that is, there is so much blood. Automatically you want to know who is bleeding, why are they bleeding, how did they get to this position, what is going on. You're literally in the middle of everything that is happening at the current moment. You don't know what's going on or like the setup for it at all. So you're questioning what's going on. You meet Roger right away, and then you find out that this other person named Dodger, and Dodger is a girl, and I think this is where we find out that they're twins. You hear more about their personality just from this. If Dodger were awake, she'd happily tell him exactly how much of her blood is on the floor. She'd look at the mess around them. She'd calculate the surface area and volume of the liquid as easily as taking a breath, and she'd turn it into a concrete number, something accurate to the quarter ounce. She'd think she was being comforting, even if the number she came up with meant, I'm leaving you. Even if it meant there is no coming back from this. Even if it meant goodbye. It's very final, it's very frantic. We can see Roger's thoughts kind of seeming through in a muddle. He's trying to think of a way to save his sister, but he's also thinking of the ways that she would put herself in the situation, like how she would try to fix it and how she's processing it potentially. It's really different from Victoria Schwab, because unlike Victoria Schwab, where we do kind of get that introducing the protagonist and like introducing the tone and the mood and the setting of the world, we're thrown directly in the middle of the action. We know there is something going on. It's horrifying, it's gruesome, but it's pulling questions at you and you're wondering what the hell's going on. It's all going on in your head as you're reading. The ending lines have you low-key panicking. Is we got it wrong, 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 we. and then we skip over to like these little quotes, or not little, but these quotes talking about two children that were very much alike and very much different at the same time, as children often are, which you can kind of tell can parallel Roger and Dodger. And then the next one is a scientific aspect about alchemy and nature. So you can kind of tell where this potentially scientific / fantastical aspect is going to come into this book, and you're pretty much invested. I think this is another way of like the in media res that I talked about, that's literally action packed and like in the middle of everything going on, because you have no idea what's going on, but you're going to keep asking questions and asking questions until like the sun comes up. Now the next one, this is where I cheated because I got really lazy toward the end of the night and I just wanted something easy. I ended up choosing The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book is about Zachary Ezra Rollins. The name's important because it gets brought up every single chapter he's in there. And when he was a child, he runs into this door that has a bee, a sword, and a key on it. And instead of walking through the door, he walks away. Now, fast forward a couple years, he is now studying for his graduate degree. He is writing his thesis, and he finds a book in his library that is authorless, but depicts the time of his childhood where he's walking past the store. And in order to find more questions, he learns about the Starless Sea and gets thrown into this world that he didn't really know existed. Now, why is this chapter good? Why is this first chapter good? I'ma tell you why. It's the pirate. So right off the bat, we hear sweet sorrows once very long ago. And then the first line is, there is a pirate in the basement. The pirate is a metaphor, but is also still a person. The basement could rightly be considered a dungeon. The pirate was placed here for numerous acts of piratey nature considered criminal enough for punishment by those non-pirates who decide such things. Someone said to throw away the key, but the key rests on a tarnished ring on a hook that hangs on the wall nearby. Now, this is really interesting because for the most part, ambiguous beginnings are a really hard thing to pull off, just because the reader wants information right away, and giving them an ambiguous meaning such as the pirate is not that. However, the more that you read on, you want to know, why is the pirate here? Why is he in the nature? Why do we have these parenthetical, almost breaking the fourth wall kind of commentary? Though since the paragraphs of this chapter are so short, it doesn't take long for you to read through this book, and by the time you get to the end, this is the final couple lines. The girl leans into the bars, her cheeks resting on cold iron, as close as she can be while she remains a world away. Close enough to kiss. Tell me a story, she says. The pirate obliges her. I think these last couple lines are very interesting because not only do we see this pirate and this girl throughout the entirety of this book, but we also see kind of the basis for this story, because this book has been advertised as a book lover's book, because it talks about books and like the meaning of stories. So to have a pirate, specifically someone who is a pirate who is known for lies and like debauchery and like all these extravagant things, to tell a story to a girl who has been unknowing thus far is pretty interesting, because he would probably have a lot of stories under his belt, and we see kind of that progression. The next one is Jurassic Park, and we all know what this one's about. This is about scientists who successfully revived dinosaurs and put them in a park, and you know, shit happens. The difference between this one and the first couple of chapters that we've read is that this is a lot denser than the previous chapters. It's not right into the action, it's more so setting the tone and the mood. Like you can tell from the first two quotes is that it's going to be about reptiles, and that it's talking about recalling a new form of life. And as we continue on through the paragraphs, we see this is talking about molecular biology and how biotechnology is going to change how we look at everything forever. And after the page break, we see that it talks about the commercialization of molecular biology, which is also very telling considering what happens in the park itself. It's basically just setting the tone and the mood of the entire book and exactly what's going to happen without telling you exactly what happens. So it's just kind of hinting at everything and giving you a sense that this is going to be very elevated. This is going to be a book that you have to really be invested in. This is not a casual book. There's going to be a lot of commentary on like probably some kind of like scientific greed or like the greed of man in general. Then the last one is a YA book, because we gotta change things up here, and that is Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chupeco. I don't know anything about this book. Again, I have just seen it. The author is half Filipina, so we gotta support. I believe this one is about a girl who is cursed and a boy who is cursed, and it's mirroring one of a heroine in the Philippine mythology. If I'm sounding wrong, people who have read the book, let me know. But the first thing that we open up to is a quote that says, "First, do no harm, king thou may be, thy divine right to magic is no cause to be as wicked as you wish," which, as you can tell, is kind of telling for the rest of the book, as well as is the title of the novel. Then we get into the actual chapter, and the line, well, the chapter title itself is pretty pulling, in which a kiss does the exact opposite. And then the beginning line is, "The frog wasn't Tala's fault this time." It grabs you by the collar right away because it's kind of, one, introducing the character, but also setting the tone for this book and maybe introducing more characters as we go along. You want to know why there was a frog involved and what she exactly did not do for there to be a frog in the first place. The first chapter is a little bit more concrete. This is a bit more of introducing the tone and the mood, as well as the protagonists. We see a lot of like the world building and what we need to know. We see that there is another character in here that was the one who kissed the boy who is now turned into a frog, and that we also find out that this character is gay, the guy who kissed the frog. And then we learn that Tala is Filipino. We learn a bit more about the world. We learn there is magic involved, that the world that we are currently in is the Royal States of America, and that spells are currently not allowed in this world. We also see more of the history of this world and kind of setting the groundwork for things that we probably will need to reference in future chapters, but also will probably be mentioned and explained upon as we go along. It's not like a super grab you by the collar and shove you against the wall kind of chapter, but it does kind of set the tone for a fantastical book that is set in a world unlike our own that we would understand had we get more information. And it's also implying that the information that we set here will be mentioned further along for us to pay attention, so that way you don't have to keep getting confused and referencing back. Like, you can tell the difference between like what kind of beginning you want, as well as to how that would lead to a potential ending, as well as what grabs you by like the collar or by the balls, whichever version of this quote you want to use, to pull you deep enough into the actual story and the actual plot line to have you continue reading, and why that is. I don't know if I explained it all that well, but hopefully I did. If not, let me know down below for whichever book that I did not explain very well, and maybe I'll try to explain better in the comments. But that is it for this writing advice video. Hopefully it made sense, and hopefully it puts into perspective kind of what you should be doing for your first chapter. Like I said, this is general advice. If you decide that this is not what you want your book to be, or if you like starting your books differently, that's fine, that's okay. But I think as a reader and a writer, the one thing that I strive for a lot when I tell people how I write so well or how I write a lot is that I read a lot. I don't read things solely just for fun, though that'd be nice. Well, I do read them for fun, like clearly, or else I would not be reading. But I also read them thinking about in the back of my head why this thing was interesting to me, why I didn't like this thing, what I would do differently, and how I can avoid doing that in my book. I think that by taking a writer's perspective on like your favorite books and like seeing how this chapter works, or why this author wrote this chapter a specific way as it connects throughout the entire book to the end, really helps kind of figure out how you're gonna write. But until next time, hit like, subscribe, comment. If you guys have any suggestions for any more writing advice videos, leave them down below. I will take any suggestion, really. It might take me a little longer if it's a bit more of a like difficult topic, but I will try to get that up for you guys. All my socials and the books that I have mentioned and analyzed will be down below. If you guys want to read those or like check them out and like see like maybe where I'm coming from if you have the book physically in your hand. But until next time, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!